Welcome to Decoded, the podcast that breaks down the latest developments, legislation, and guidance from the world of cybersecurity. In each episode, we cut through the jargon to make sense of what's really happening across the cyber landscape and what it means for your organisation. In this episode, I'll be speaking to data privacy and cyber expert Alison Baylis. We'll be discussing the recent high-profile cyber breaches, what we've learned from these breaches, the upcoming legislation on ransomware payments, what this means for organisations, and how we can manage supply chain risks. Stay tuned. Hi, Alison.
Hello, hi. Thanks.
So, Alison.
Good to be here,
Oh,
huh?
it's a pleasure to have you. So, on our first episode as well. Yep. So, for those of you who are following our usual cybersecurity podcast series, you'll notice that we're in the same studio. But this is very different. So we're not covering very specific technical topics in this one. What we want to do is demystify some of the cybersecurity issues and concerns which we think are important, and hopefully to just explain in sort of plain speak really what we need to do to create some more resilient environment. So it's great to have you here, Alison. Alison, do you want to just say a little bit about your background, because you've been doing this for a few years now?
Yep, certainly. So, I've been working here at RISD for 3 years now, but prior to that, I spent some time working within the UK police forces, and prior to that, in the NHS for a significant amount of time. But my very, very first step into cybersecurity was actually in the automotive industry.
Okay.
So actually not too far away from where we sat here at MG Rover Group, where I spent many years until unfortunately it closed. But obviously you can see that cybersecurity is important to all of those organisations for different reasons.
Yeah. And I think there's been a number of high-profile cybersecurity events recently, and what we don't want to go into the kind of detail because there's lots of commentary on what happened and how it happened. But what I'd like to just cover at a high level is just what have we learned about cybersecurity from these recent events. So I'm particularly thinking about the Marks and Spencer event, obviously JLR, Harrods, Co-op, and there's been a number of others as well. So do you want to just give us a quick summary of what we've learned, from what we think we've learned from these events?
Yeah, so I think the really key point there is these are big high street or UK big brands. It shows us that nobody's immune.
Yeah.
And it shows us that actually the impact can be catastrophic. So actually they're reporting that the JLR cyber attack is actually the UK's biggest cyber event, and they're suggesting that the cost may be about 1.9 billion.
Wow.
They account for 4% of the export market out of the UK. So obviously it's not just impact on those organisations, it's impact on the economy. We saw impacts on, the supply chain, even down to, I think we talked about it previously, even down to, sort of the local cafeterias and the local businesses that actually are impacted. We're seeing that. We're seeing things that supply chain entry points as well, which is really, really important as we going more and more into using cloud and hosted solutions. That means actually we're transferring some of our risk, but we're not actually transferring our responsibility for making sure that the security is in place. So I think the message is really it costs the economy, it costs businesses, and actually when you talk about some of the other incidents which may not be retail, may actually be emergency services, it costs lives.
Yeah. And you mentioned supply chain there. So, organisations or business leaders may be thinking, we've got our security controls in place in our environments, but supply chain is often missed, isn't it? It's because supply chains can be quite complex, can be quite diverse. So how do organisations manage their supply chain risk?
So with the supply chain risk, the important thing really is that it's not a one-off process. So organisations will do a lot of things at the outset, perhaps, at procurement, at selection, and maybe with onboarding. But throughout the whole of your relationship and your contract with a third party, you need to be making sure that you will know what controls are in place, that you're holding them to account. And that's not just actually taking their word for it around a certification or anything else like that. It's actually seeking evidence. So, I would be saying to organisations that, okay, quite often with a contract, then the supplier will have meetings with procurement, they'll have meetings about the service and the provision of the service. There needs to be the same meetings about security and actually about, sort of what's going on within those organisations.
So one of the things that you, as an organisation, you're advised to do is to conduct a sort of a supplier assurance process, and often there's various sort of criteria in there. So if you're accessing my environment, then you need to meet these security requirements. If you're not accessing my environments, but I'm sharing data with you, then there might be a separate criteria you have to meet. And in those sort of criteria, you often see standards which suppliers need to abide by: Cyber Essentials, Cyber Essentials Plus, ISO 27001. I think it's a good time to just touch on those different standards and perhaps the differences between something like Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus and ISO 27001. So do you want to just give us a quick...
Of course, yeah. So from a Cyber Essentials perspective, this is the NCSE government-backed minimum standards. So it's saying to organisations, these are the minimum controls that you need to have in place to protect your organisation. So those are prescriptive. So for Cyber Essentials, it's prescriptive about the controls and the requirements, but then with Cyber Essentials Plus, there's a requirement around testing those controls and having penetration testing in place. So they are, like I say, laid down. It's government-backed, recommended to all businesses. In fact, the ministerial letter that came out on the 14th of October actually urged UK businesses to actually follow that route and to adopt Cyber Essentials Plus. Government suppliers are required to meet that standard as well. When we talk about ISO 27001, that's risk-based. So actually the organisation determines what the scope is. So you might actually have an organisation that says they're ISO 27001 accredited, but it might be limited to just one section of the business, not the entire business. So if that's the case, then actually, you're not necessarily applying those controls across. And again, every organisation is going to have a different view of their risk and a different view of what's acceptable and what's within scope. So you can pick and choose effectively as a catalogue as to what you want to put in scope with ISO 27001. With CE and CE Plus, that is actually prescribed and it's set out there exactly what you need to have in place.
So it's a technical standard, isn't it?
It is technical,
and it's very binary in the sense, so you have to have these 5 controls in place, otherwise you don't get the certification. Whereas with ISO, it's more risk-based. That's what we're saying.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I guess it's important for organisations to understand their risk tolerance, and then they need to make sure their suppliers are meeting those risk requirements if you are asking for ISO 27001.
That's right, yeah.
The technical baseline of Cyber Essentials is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing is, it's important to say it's not just about the technical controls. It's, about the whole defence in depth, people controls, organisational controls, and physical controls as well. The best security system in the world and the best access control systems are no good if actually we're very polite and let somebody into a building. Yeah.
Cyber Essentials, self-assessment. Yeah. Is that good enough, do you think?
Well, it's backed by ASME. It's subject to scrutiny. The organisations that are actually, sort of doing the assessments on behalf of IASME are all, sort of have to meet a certain standard. So there is, you've got that consistency of process. So, I think that actually, self-assessment is a really good start, but you really need to be testing your controls, and you really need to be having those penetration tests and making sure that actually, you're not just completing a tick box exercise, that you're actually confident that those controls are working and are in place.
Okay, so cybersecurity then. So in terms of stats, latest stats, so National Cybersecurity Centre. So they're saying 4 nationally significant cyber attacks per week. Cybersecurity Breaches Survey 2025, so saying 43% of UK businesses and 30% of charities reported experiencing a cyber breach or attack in the last 12 months. So why is this happening, do you think?
Well, I think there's a few reasons really. So the significant attacks that the NCSC are talking about, those are coming from hostile states like China and Russia. So, if there's 4 significant attacks, there's going to be multiple more, sort of opportunistic attacks that they're detecting. And yes, you're right about the increase around it. And those are the organisations that are reporting it. There might actually be other organisations that aren't reporting it. So I suspect those percentages may actually be higher. The increase is really going to be around the fact that actually most organisations are fully digital these days. We've got more interconnectivity. We've got people working remotely from home. There's distractions. They may not actually apply the same level of security measures that they may do if they were working in an office. We've got cybercrime, is very, very lucrative. We've got a whole dark web out there for selling data, for selling tools to actually make it easy for somebody to actually just go and, invoke an attack on an organisation. So while it's a lucrative business, there's going to be attacks, very much so.
And phishing remains the dominant vector.
Yeah.
So do you want to say something about that?
I think the thing is what we've seen more recently as well is more sophisticated ways of phishing. People are using AI and tools to actually really, articulate some really sophisticated attacks. It's becoming more and more difficult. So we talk about the human firewall. We talk about people being your biggest threat and your biggest asset. So actually a security-aware trained user is a really good, defence. But, we are seeing a lot of sophisticated attacks.
So training is really important, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Security awareness training for organisations. Yeah. So if you were advising a business 5 years ago and you were advising the same business today, would that advice be different, do you think?
I don't think it would be different. I've been doing this for a long time. Back in the days when it wasn't called cybersecurity, when it was just plain old information security. Yeah. So fundamentally, this is about protecting information and the assets that it relies on. So actually, it's basic risk management. Yeah. It's about having the set of controls in place. It's always been about the same set of controls. But what organisations need to really do is really understand their risks and really understand what their risk appetite is as well, understand what the impact is. I think we've become so conditioned to coming in, switching on the lights, switching on the laptop. It's just there and it works, and you don't necessarily think, well, what happens if I can't do this? Even things like, in the event of an incident, the first thing on somebody's communication or incident response plan is, let's contact people. Well, have you got a contact list? Have you got anything that's actually in place that's a backup, because you're reliant on your digital technology? Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it, that as a pen testing business, so when I talk to our lead pen testers, they're still finding the same issues that they were finding years ago: patching, missing patches, configuration issues. Yep. So it's the basics that we still are not getting right in organisations, which is leaving vulnerabilities that are being exploited.
Yeah. Some of the incidents that we've seen, in the last couple of years, really have been down to organisations still not having multi-factor authentication in place, to a privileged account that's left dormant because actually it was there for a project and it wasn't actually secured afterwards. So all of these things can really easily go undetected until it's far too late.
Yeah. Let's talk about cyber insurance then. So I know organisations sort of use cyber insurance to try and mitigate some of the risks. So let's just talk a little bit about cyber insurance and, how important is it, and, does it work?
Well, it's interesting because cyber insurance is going to be like any other kind of insurance policy. There's a lot of prerequisites. Yep. So if you don't meet those prerequisites or maintain those prerequisites, then you could actually have a problem on your hands when you come to claim on the insurance. So, most cyber insurance policies will expect an organisation to have all of the controls in place that we talked about, potentially to be following a security or cyber assurance framework, like the ones that we've mentioned, CE+, ISO, or even the National Cybersecurity Centre, NCSE CAF. So actually, I've known organisations that have been refused cyber insurance because they don't have sufficient controls in place.
Right.
And equally, if you've got cyber insurance in place, you need to understand what it entails. You need to understand how you invoke it. You need to understand how, for example, if you've got third parties that are working with you to provide secure services, how they're going to integrate with them and work with them in the event of an incident.
Yeah.
It's really important.
So it's a nice to have. It'll pay for some of the activity, the remediation activity, but you can't delegate risk ownership to a cybersecurity provider. An insurance provider. You slow on the wrist, don't you? That's really
Yeah,
important.
I mean, if you think about it, it's very similar to data protection. You know, from a data protection point of view, you're the data controller for personal information. If somebody else is processing it for you or somebody else is involved in it, you still own that risk.
Yeah.
You know, and the same thing goes for the cyber insurance. It's effectively transferring your risk, but you don't lose the ownership.
No, and you know it'll pay for some of those activities, but the reputational damage, loss of confidence in you and your sort of client base, you know, you still have to manage all of that. So it's, I guess, it's part of a cyber strategy, but not a replacement for good security controls.
No, and absolutely not. And also, you know, think about the cost of some of these incidents. I don't know how much it would cost you to take out cyber insurance to cover you for a 1.9 billion loss.
Probably a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay, legislation then. So there's a potential for some legislation to be brought into being to do with ransom payments. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk for some time about actually preventing public sector and government organisations from paying ransom, you know, sort of ransoms if they have a ransomware attack.
Yeah.
It's been talked about for a while, but actually there's been a big move recently to actually turn this into legislation. So it's looking likely that it will happen, and I don't think it'll be too far away.
Okay.
So what that means is that organisations that are part of critical national infrastructure or government bodies will not be allowed to pay a ransom. They'll have to report to the government any ransomware incidents that impact on them. It means that private sector organisations don't have the free will to decide whether they're going to pay or not. They also have to go to the government and ask for, you know, sort of whether they can pay a ransom if they intend to, because the government may actually say, well, no, that's funding some, you know, sort of some terrorist crime or some kind of organised crime, or it breaches policy. And there's also going to be a mandatory requirement to report any ransomware incidents within 72 hours. So that aligns to the ICO reporting timeframes, which obviously means that the relationship that the NCSC and the Information Commissioner have is, you know, going to be strengthened in terms of reporting of data breaches and cyber events.
And paying a ransom isn't a guarantee of getting your data back, is it, or getting the keys to allow you to decrypt the data?
No.
So it's kind of false economy, isn't it? Really, having in place, you know, a pot of money to pay a ransom. But with the legislation coming into force, so if an organisation is not allowed to pay a ransom, what we're saying is that they need to have good processes in place to defend against a cyber attack, to detect an attack, but obviously, and also respond and recover from attack. So I guess this is all designed to help organisations build more resilience. Yeah.
So there's two things to it. One is about cyber resilience, and there's a bill in relation to that as well about securing the UK. The other thing is actually to make us less attractive as a target for cyber attackers. But, you know, you are still going to get cyber attackers out there. They are still, and even if they don't, you know, sort of get paid for it, you're still going to have the people that want the kudos, you know, and want to have, you know, sort of the bragging rights of what they've achieved. So it's really important for organisations to put controls in place to start with to prevent it from happening, to reduce the impact in the event of a cybersecurity incident. And actually, I know we've talked about things like ransomware, we've talked about, you know, malicious attacks, but there's also non-malicious attacks. You've also got things like environmental issues, which can actually take out an organisation. So it's about planning and preparing for those events, putting the right controls in place, about making sure that, you know, that it's on the board agenda, so that the board are completely informed of what the organisation's risks are, you know, sort of what's being done about it, so that they can make informed decisions around the business, and also about making sure that you've got a plan in place. So you need to have a plan in place for when it happens. I'll repeat it again, when, not if. So you need to have that plan in place, but it's no good having that plan in place and dusting it off when you're in the midst of an incident. You need to actually have those tabletop exercises and actually, you know, sort of test out that plan. Does it work? Do we need to adjust it? And do that on a regular basis.
And that's a lot cheaper than responding to a live incident, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And if you take any single incident and actually unpick it, there's so many things that could have been prevented, or actually the impact could have been, limited. So there's always learning from an incident, but what we'd say is actually don't wait for the incident. Try and do your learning through those tabletop exercises beforehand.
Absolutely. You mentioned board level there. So, and we see a lot of authority delegated to IT teams for managing risk. So, and Alison, you run our senior executive training courses, the senior information risk training courses. So, what are the responsibilities of a board when it comes to cybersecurity?
So at a board level, effectively, if you take an incident, the board are going to be the ones that are going to be asked the questions. The board are going to be the ones that are facing the media, and actually the board are ultimately responsible for the business. And we're talking about the impact of a cybersecurity incident or event on an organisation meeting its strategic objectives, which means that it's very much a board level responsibility. You don't have to be a technical expert. Like I say, don't shy away just because it's cyber. That it doesn't mean it's all about digital. It means it's actually about protecting your environment, which you rely on. And I always say, you don't need to be an accountant to be able to make a sound financial decision. You don't need to be a lawyer to be able to make a sound decision about whether you're doing something in your organisation that could actually fall foul of the law. Same thing goes with cybersecurity. You do not need to be a technical expert. You just need to ask the right questions. Even if that's just taking some of these recent events and going to your subject matter experts and saying, tell me how this can't happen to us, assure me, or tell me about the risks that we've got so that we can address them.
So ultimately it's about risk management, isn't it?
It is fundamentally risk management.
Just like managing financial risk or operational risk, in an organisation, this is just another type of risk that organisations need to manage. So we're coming towards the end of this cybercast. So we're just to key takeaways then. So retail still remains a vulnerable sector. We've had lots of incidents in this environment. Any commentary on that?
I think, so retail is being impacted, but we're also seeing other industries as well. As we say, nobody's immune to it. We have seen, large organisations that are being attacked. We're seeing it being alluded to that actually the entry point is via supply chain. So the important thing there is secure your supply chain, really important. And again, if we go back to things like cyber incident response planning, you've got to include your supply chain in your incident response plans as well. But I think, we are always going to continue to be a target, but what we need to do is to make sure that organisations and businesses are taking action to actually, sort of reduce their risk of being, attacked.
We often talk about attack surface, and when we talk about attack surface, I think most people think it's just the digital space, but of course there's also the physical device security we have to take into account. Can an attacker get into our environment, our physical environment? Our device is vulnerable. So physical security assessments are also part of that strategy.
Definitely, So when we talk about penetration testing as well, we talk about penetration testing from a technical perspective, but also from a physical perspective. And we are still a very polite bunch of people that open doors and let people in. Don't challenge people. You can challenge somebody. You can challenge somebody politely. And actually, that's good. That's what people should be doing within an organisation. And it is really surprising just how far we can get into an organisation.
I smile because I used to do physical security assessments many years ago. And the easiest way to get in was just to wait by the door. And someone will just hold it open for you. And as long as you look convincing, look like you belong there. Well, if you're in a building, people tend to think that you're here, so you belong here. And they hold the door open for you, and in you go.
Dress accordingly to the environment as well. So dress accordingly to the environment, and you'll fit in. I've known of security professionals that have gone and signed in at reception and said, I know where I'm going, I'll just head off. And then they've just gone and stood in the back of a very important big meeting and nobody's challenged them. So it's easy. And this comes back down to that human thing again, really, about, humans being your greatest defence.
Right, so I think we've covered a lot of this already. Organisations are still underprepared. Human error, phishing, we've covered all that. These are just my notes to make sure we cover all the things that we need to cover. So more regulatory enforcement pressure. So I guess as we get more of these larger, more visible incidents, I think that's going to add more pressure on government to kind of put some of these into legislation. But it shouldn't really take government to put these into legislation for us to realise that these are things that this is baseline security that we're talking about, isn't it? A lot of this.
It is very much so. And actually, if you look at things like you said about regulatory, if you look at some of the biggest incidents and the regulatory action that's been given by people like the Information Commissioner's Office, it is relating to cybersecurity events.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing to say here is when we talk about information security and cybersecurity, we're going back to those three triads again about confidentiality, integrity and availability. So actually, if somebody attacks you and you're a victim of ransomware, they've taken your information. There might be confidential or personal identifiable information that's actually then placed in the dark web. It's no use to you because you haven't got it because they've encrypted it, and it's not available to you. So actually it's compromising all three of those areas. And I think one of the most alarming incidents that happened recently was when there was the attack on the nursery chain. And actually what that happened then was the cyber attackers then actually took the information that they had about the parents of the children who were attending the nursery and started ringing them and asking them to, put pressure on to pay the ransom. So, imagine being on the end of a call like that.
We talked about supply chain, but of course in that supply chain we also have third parties who have access to your environment. So we're talking about IT managed service providers, SaaS providers, and they're often overlooked because organisations may think, well, they're an IT service management provider. Surely they're secure. But of course, we've seen situations where that isn't the case, is it?
Absolutely, yeah. So it comes back to that thing. So yes, organisations are keen to form partnerships, but actually you've got to treat them as untrusted as well, and and apply that same level of requirements and the same level of scrutiny to them. In fact, potentially more than you would do to your own environment, because, like you say, especially if you've got people that you've got with privileged access and looking after your environment, it's really important that you've got the assurances in place.
And attackers will look for the weakest link.
Yeah.
And that could be a human, one of our team,
Yeah.
or an organisation that's connected into your environment that potentially isn't as secure as you perhaps are. So it's really, I guess, it's really important to do those risk assessments.
Yeah.
I think where we've seen this cause potential issue is, so an organisation's outsourcing IT, and as part of that outsource, there's a key component, and there's only a handful of providers that provide that key component. So so from a business perspective, they need to contract with that organisation. And then security come into play and say, well, we need to do an assessment, but the business is saying, well, no, we need that component. And there's often a conflict, isn't there?
Yeah, there is, yeah.
So how do we manage that conflict, and how does the board come into this?
So I think that's where it's really important to get security on board early on into projects, early on into business change, and actually look at the options and the alternatives. If we look at one of the incidents that occurred, which was not a malicious attack, it was the fire at the substation that affected Heathrow Airport. There was a decision made within that organisation not to actually, put some controls in place that could have potentially prevented that from happening. Now, where did that decision take place? Where was that discussion? Where was were there some options provided? So it's really important that, as I say, it's board level decisions. Board are aware of the risks. Board are aware of the options, and then they can make informed decisions about that. But just really need to take some learning from all these incidents that are happening.
And just to finish off then on learning, I guess the focus should be on resilience rather than just cybersecurity on its own. So we're talking about being resilient to a cyber attack, and I think you said earlier it's a question of when, not if.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we take that approach. What we're saying is that you need to not only have good security controls in place, but be prepared for when it all goes wrong.
Yeah, you've got to assume that there's a breach.
Yeah.
You've got to assume it, and you've got to look at it, and you've got to look at actually what controls you've got in place.
Yeah.
If somebody's actually in your digital environment, and actually with a lot of these attacks, they can be in there and dormant for several weeks or months. If somebody's in your environment, what damage can they do? You know, can they move laterally? Have you got the right segmentation in place? Have you got login in place? Are you actually, you know, sort of being alerted to what activities are taking place? Are you acting upon those alerts? Those are really, really key.
Yeah. Yeah. Alison, thank you for that insight.
Thank you.
Extremely useful. And we will break those. We've covered loads of topics here. We will break those topics down into more manageable chunks in future episodes of Decoded. But thank you for joining us. And if you want to learn more about cybersecurity, we have a number of podcasts. Our technical podcasts are on our website at aristi.co.uk. There's also blogs and some guidance on good practice around cybersecurity. So thank you for joining us on Decoded. See you on the next one.